Welcome everyone for our first edition of ClimateTech Unveiled Investor Series. This series is brought to you by the CFAR Alliance, ClimateTech Venture Investing Collab, which is led by the Catalyst Fund. I'm Mylise, I'm the managing partner at the Catalyst Fund and also the Collab lead. And it's a dynamic community within the CFAR Alliance dedicated to shaping a climate resilient future through visionary investments. So it's really a group of investors, like many of you in the room right now, that are either actively engaged in climate tech innovation across emerging markets, or that are keen to explore this space and want to learn more by peers in the industry. So the purpose of the series is to host conversations where we dive deep into impactful and scalable and commercial climate investment opportunities, and to enable connections between startups and investors in the climate tech space. So in every one of these, you'll see a leading investor that knows a lot about the sector that we're presenting, and also a leading startup founder, or maybe a couple, that can tell us more about their story and what they're building and inspire us. So let's jump right into it. I'm very excited to host Fiona and Alex for the first conversation on the potential of direct air capture and why investors are betting on it, especially in Africa. So Fiona Mugambi here, she's the Chief of Staff and Partnerships Lead at Octavia Carbon. Spoiler alert, Octavia Carbon is one of our portfolio companies. I may be very biased, but I don't think so. And I think you'll get to be the judge of that by the end of the discussion today. And we also have Alex Bloomberg, who is a climate investor, an angel investor in Octavia, but also a very accomplished entrepreneur and radio journalist. He's the founder of Gimlet Media, producer of the podcast How to Save a Planet, former producer of many shows that probably you all have enjoyed, like This American Life and the Planet Money podcast on NPR. I know I was a huge fan. So as I told him earlier, I was nervous to host a podcast producer on this first call, but I hope the conversation lives up to the standards.
Well, I'm nervous about being on the other side, so.
Yeah, great.
We're both nervous.
So we've been hearing a lot of news lately, right, on direct air capture, of the direct air capture industry. Fiona, you guys have been all over the news recently, which is awesome, but usually it's really from places like Iceland and Texas and Wyoming. And here, an hour away from Nairobi, Octavia Carbon is building the first commercial DACC machine of the Southern Hemisphere. And it's working to deploy this technology and plan to begin storing CO2 underground, which is awesome, in 2024. Recently, I heard somebody compare, CO2 like having toothpaste coming out of a tube and then trying to put it back inside, which is obviously an impossible task, but maybe not so impossible as it appears, thanks to technologies like what Octavia Carbon is doing. So for the audience, Fiona, starting with you, can you tell us more about what Octavia does and why you decided to build in Kenya?
Okay, thank you so much for introduction, Mylise, and thank you so much for putting up this panel. It's going to be a lovely conversation. So Octavia, who are we? We are a climate tech startup, and what do? We design and build low-cost machines which remove carbon from the atmosphere. And so why do we do it here in Kenya? And just for context, direct air capture, or just removing carbon from the atmosphere using that kind of technology, it faces hard constraints. And one of these constraints is that it requires a lot of energy. You can imagine how CO2 is buried into the atmosphere. I don't know if you remember your high school or primary, your preschool years, how it was. It makes up a very small percentage of the air, carbon dioxide. So separating it from nitrogen and oxygen, it requires a lot of energy. Something else is that there are very few places in the world that you can store carbon for eternity. And these places are very, very few in the world. And something else is that there's very little community buy-in. And Kenya is able to address some of these constraints. Number one, we have abundant renewable energy. This is especially geothermals, which are going to power these machines. Something else, we have suitable geology, which is good for permanent CO2 storage. And then something else is that we have innovative talent, which is going to really drive down the cost of DACC, just making it fall down the cost curve. And, the co-benefits here in Kenya are pretty impressive. And how is that? I mean, once we utilize the waste geothermal heat and the waste geothermal electricity, we in turn will be able to reduce the cost of electricity for millions of Kenyans. So yeah, that's why we came to Kenya and deployed here in Kenya.
That's incredible, Fiona, and completely agree. So it's the mix of the right energy mix, especially geothermal, the geology, which makes it great for permanent storage over time, the talent, and your team alone has grown from 3 to 34, more than that now?
Currently we are 47. And
37 now in the span of 12 months, which is incredible, very, very high quality engineers. So a follow-up question for you is that, of course, DACC is becoming a competitive space. I mean, today, the only operational DACC machine in the world is actually in Iceland that has geological conditions similar to what we're seeing in Kenya, but it's going to become more competitive. And actually, that's one of the positioning of the Great Rift Valley, or the Great Carbon Valley, as they call it, in Kenya. So how is Octavia going to set itself apart? Like, what do you think you're going to do differently?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And for us, it comes down to 3 points. Number one, this collective agency, our technology is mature for this region. And something else is we have a proven track record. When you talk about collective agency here is we as Octavians, I mean, here in Kenya at home, we have experienced the first-hand effects of climate change. And because of this, we understand the unwavering urgency to really fight climate change. And so we use every tool at our disposal to really innovate around direct air capture, this carbon removal method, and really take it down the cost curve. Something else is that we design our mature technologies designed to leverage on the geothermal resources we have here in the country. And because of that, we are able to really take the cost of DACC down the cost curve. And something else, we really design our technology around the area we are in. So it's not just designing it at lab scale, but we also build it. And, through building it, I know we've been at our facility, you've seen the at-scale machines we have. Because we've built it, we are able to test them extensively. And because we are able to test them extensively, we are able to have a record of, some of the learnings we are expecting from our pilot plant. So that is how we stand out from other DACC companies.
Right, and the cost piece, I think it's really essential. We'll get back to that, actually, cost and scale. Before that, though, just for the audience, how many tons of CO2 are you planning to store by next year and in the future?
Yeah, so for our pilot plant, it will be capturing 1,000 tons of carbon per annum. Yeah,
1,000 tons. Okay. And
yeah.
of course, remains. I think we need much more.
I mean,
right at scale to remove.
We need to remove like billion tons of carbon from the atmosphere. I think it's 5 to 16 billion tons of carbon. And I know, and let me just give you the name of the plant. We call it Project Hummingbird. And I know you've heard about the hummingbird story, but really from the hummingbird story is that the hummingbird is really doing what it can with what it has. And I know our pilot plant is just a drop in the ocean, but it's the first step we have to take in meeting the climate goals.
100%. First step is critical, and first movers like yourself.
Yes.
So switching to you, Alex, we heard from Fiona already a very strong case for DACC to revert climate change, position Africa as a leader in climate action, why Kenya is the best place. But if I'm not mistaken, you're one of the first angel investors in Octavia, and now, right?
I think so. One of them, yeah.
One of them, and a climate investor more broadly in other companies too. So what convinced you to invest in them?
Well, I actually remember when I first heard the name Octavia Carbon. I was at a ClimateTech happy hour in Manhattan, and I was talking to a founder who was doing sort of like who's making diamonds from direct air captured carbon, and so their business, they needed to find cheap carbon that had been taken from the air, and they were like, "We're getting it from these guys in Kenya for so much cheaper than we can get it anywhere else." And I was like, "Oh, I'm really interested in them." So he eventually connected me, and that's how I found Martin and the team. And I think one of the things that I was attracted to, I'm attracted. I invested for many reasons. One, I think. I think it's essential that this is a very necessary technology, and I think it will be, sort of taking carbon from the air and burying it into the ground, turning it into other things. I think is going to be the future. It's the future. It's the required future for us to, sort of like maintain our way of lives as human beings. And I think. I hope that with lots of innovation, it can become sort of a cost competitive future as well. And I think to the folks that are building that industry, that industrial capability, they're going to be the winners when all this shakes out. So I was always interested in DACC, carbon capture, carbon removal, and then I became really interested in sort of like the especially in Kenya, just because there's so many benefits to doing it there. Fiona mentioned them, but I think it bears repeating. Just the basic math of carbon capture is it takes lots of electricity. If you have to use fossil electricity to capture the carbon, you're burning carbon to capture carbon. It doesn't make sense. The grid in Kenya is something like 94 or 95% clean right now. The electricity that will be powering Octavia's plants is full on geothermal, which is the best, cleanest power source that we have, fully renewable, completely clean, sort of like not at all intermittent. And so you can just be essentially running your electricity carbon free. And so that makes the process much more efficient. And then you have this incredible storage medium, the basalt fields that are right there. There's other ones there's a couple around the world. Some of them are underwater. Some of them are in very, very hard to access places. And so here you have like this pretty prime storage site, not very far from a major urban area. And so there's just a ton of benefits. But I will say the thing that really convinced me actually, so I was like, this seems like but I will be honest, my initial investment was more like a heart investment than a head investment. I was like, this is amazing. These guys, I like people who just do it. I like people who have a bias towards action. And Martin had a bias towards action. He got the team together, and Duncan and Fiona and Mike, and got them all together and just started working. He was like, we're going to do it. And, damn the people who say otherwise. And I really appreciate that. But one of the things that I realized later is something that you touched on, Fiona, which is that in a brand new industry, prior experience doesn't really matter, right? Like it's basically everybody is just doing a lot of science experiments as they're trying to figure out how to do it. And so for that you just need iteration. You need lots of smart people working on the problem, and you need lots of places to field test it. And the team at Octavia, like those 47 super smart people, they're just getting so many more, so many more at bats on this problem. Right. And they can deploy much more easily than you can in lots of other places where you have like permitting. I mean, it's not like it's Wild West. It's like there are regulations, and there are people overseeing it, but the regulatory environment is biased more towards action there, right, than in some other parts of the world. And so you can actually work with people, get things built, test your stuff much more quickly, and much more cost effectively. Like the team if you were trying to put that team together, the team that you have, in San Francisco, you're spending 10 times what you're spending in Kenya. And I think, and then the final thing I'll say is when I went and sort of hung out there, this is something that for me as a founder really resonated, where I was with the team in their facility outside of Nairobi. And this is sort of woo-woo, but the energy, there's a belief and a sort of a focus that I think is one of these ineffable sort of secret sauces of like teams that succeed versus not. And I really felt it there. It felt like in the beginning of my startup Gimlet, like where people were just so excited to come, so bought in on the mission, so excited for the thing that they're building. And that really, I think, can carry you a long way.
Absolutely. I felt the same way when I visited the office the first time and sat on one of their Monday stand-up, with everyone working towards one mission, which is how do we actually really make a dent in terms of climate action and ensure a more resilient, more climate positive future for all. And they definitely believe it, like to the end of the day. So a quick follow-up though, were you looking at other carbon removal plays before investing in this? And did you have how do you assess this versus other opportunities?
I mean, I wasn't looking at this. I wasn't looking at the sector specifically. I'm interested in the region. I think I think in general, my sort of very, very back of the napkin thesis is that, the world is going to need more and more things made with clean energy and clean technology. And that seems like it's something of an inflection point, the same way that like the expansion of global trade was an inflection point, sort of like post-war, and places like Singapore and South Korea and China were sort of poised to take advantage of that and become the workshops to the world. I think there's another inflection point happening where the world is just going to need lots of green things made with green energy, clean energy. And so that's going to favor the regions of the world that can deliver, that have excess capacity of clean energy. There's very few places in the world like that. Kenya is one of them.
Right.
When you talk to people in the States who are trying to procure clean energy for clean energy projects here, and there's like years-long waiting lists.
Yes.
In Kenya, there's excess capacity ready to go. It's the opposite problem. There's not enough demand. They need projects to sort of like to be off takers for projects. So to me, that was like, and I think that DACC is a very, very obvious sort of driver of new technologies, be it direct air capture, carbon to value, other kinds of things. Like a lot of the learnings from DACC are going to be applied in other places. Like the more we go down the cost curve in DACC, the more it's going to help other industries. So to me, it was just sort of like a bet on an industry and a region.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's true. I mean, the Rift Valley really is an ideal home for scaling and testing first and scaling, this latest and most ambitious technologies, climate technologies for removing carbon, storing it, but also in other spaces, more even nature-based solutions, and then to really scale it on a global level. Like I think that's the story that is so appealing. Like how can countries in Africa really be in a leading position to, as you were saying, provide that clean energy and other climate solutions for the world.
Right, and in a situation where it's like pretty open right now, like there's the tech is being developed right now. And like, if that tech can be developed in Nairobi and exported to the world, that's fantastic. And I think that's the opportunity here.
Exactly. So Fiona, this is obviously a grand ambition. And I want to go back to your point that you were making earlier around the cost effectiveness, right? Because experts, have argued that DACC might not be the most cost effective, but it is in Kenya. And how have you responded to those critiques, and what have you done to really convince investor that you will be able to drive scalability and cost effectiveness?
Yeah. So I think even before I even tell them about cost effectiveness, I think I just also give them a little bit of context and just do some form of refresher on the climate science statistics. And climate science is clear. We need to decarbonize and we also need carbon removals. And carbon removals such as DACC, come in after you've decarbonized, and they come in after you've decarbonized, and they come in to solve also the hard to abate emissions, especially industries such as cement, chemicals such as those used in fertilizers. So, I would start with that kind of context and let them know that, we need both to decarbonize and carbon removals. And, carbon removals, especially from DACC, will be able to contribute a significant dent in actually removing the billion tons of carbon that is required. And I know, right now we are currently working with kiloton removal, megaton removal to some extent, but we will get there once we are able to commercialize. And making something cost effective is something which has been done before. And our greatest resource as in the world is human capacity. And before 10 years ago, 20 years ago, solar was super expensive, batteries were super expensive, and we believe DACC can do for Kenya what China did for solar PV. Solar used to be super expensive, and it's only have billionaires, like people who really had a lot of money, really put this in their homes. But now, when you go in almost every in every 10 houses, at least there's someone who has solar installed. And that's the vision here with DACC. Yes, right now it's expensive, and that's because the technology is is in its early stages. It's very nascent. So as we optimize it, as we improve the technology, as we are able to solidify the supply chain links, and once we go to commercialization, definitely the unit economics for that will really go down.
It's one of those weird lessons that somehow people never learn, is that like things go down the cost curve. And I know people talk about it all the time, but it's still, it seems like it's hard to, I'm old enough to remember when there was a thing called a calculator, and it was really expensive. That wasn't that long ago. It was like, it cost more than an iPhone to buy a calculator. So, just I think what we've seen in solar, wind, every other product basically ever introduced, like we will see in DACC.
Right. And I think what's also interesting, what you said, Fiona, is the fact that you really are providing a solution that is very permanent. It's a permanent way of removing CO2 and then storing it in partnership, obviously, with Sela, your storage partner. And for that, obviously, you can sell carbon credits on the back of it.
Yeah,
sure. And so can you tell us a bit more about that and the recent partnerships you've signed with Puro? Like what price are you selling?
Yeah. So currently we are, depending also with the vintage year and the time our customers are interested at the delivery of the credits, it goes from 500 to 1,200, also depending on the delivery. But delivery in 5 years, that is to $500 per ton of CO2. So currently we are our MRV is being done by Puro, Puro.earth. They're the best in class for this kind of certification for geologically stored carbon. And then now we are in marketplaces such as Patch and Cloverleaf, just where we are able to really put our project. And maybe just to touch on just some little things, maybe I thought the dependencies investors should be aware of. I just wanted to touch a little bit on, DACC is, yes, it's in its early stages, and investors should be able to put up some form of should be able to really separate some form of patient capital for this. And, it's one of those investments, and, it ties down to the whole cost-effective question before, is that right now, yes, the investment is going to be very high, but then the reward in 10 years, the impact on the communities, it's going to really, the reward at the end outweighs the initial high investment in the beginning. So that is what I would say about things to look for. And with you just mentioned Sela, our storage partners, yes, we'll be geolocated with them, but even investors, these are the kind of questions they should be asking. Who are your storage partners? Will you be transporting your CO2 to them? And that transportation, is there also is there carbon footprint towards that? Because in as much as you're removing this carbon, you also need to account for how much your own carbon footprint as a DACC company or as a climate tech company. You can't be the net. There is a net carbon removal, and that is, the carbon removed minus your own kind of carbon footprint. And then something else, I thought maybe investors should look into, even as they're looking at these investors and who they're at, the companies and who they're partnering with is, the energy source. And, when you talk about the energy source, it's, yes, fine, we don't want to power our DACC machines with fossil fuel energy. And something else that it was very interesting is that you also don't want to replace the already existing renewable electrons in the mini grid, which was supposed to really replace a fossil fuel industry. So if a geothermal was put in the renewable electron was put to phase out a fossil fuel industry, you can't use that for that because you want to decarbonize first, then you remove. And those are the kind of things you need. I think investors really need to look out for. Yeah, right. I just thought we should mention that because it's tied down to also, it being cost effective.
Of course. You can't look at it in isolation. You have to take a bigger view, actually a bit of a system view at all these other pieces as well that make that possible. Totally agree. And Fiona, just sort of, we all are aware, you've already sold carbon credits, right? Even if you haven't started storing CO2 yet. Can you tell us a bit more about that and to whom and which partners have been interested so far?
Yeah, so we've already pre-sold 465K worth of carbon credits, and our latest customers are Agenda through Snapchat through Agenda, and also Klarna. These are our latest customers, and those also I don't know if you know about Milky Wire Foundation. So they came in Q2, so we've been very happy with the progress there, and yeah.
That's great. Yeah. Big tech companies are also really betting on this. Sorry, Alex, go ahead.
Well, I think one of the other things as an investor, in just purely as a financial investor, in sort of what is this product, it is the upsides of like the business are pretty awesome. Like you've got a very, very, very wealthy set of customers who have promised that they're going to be buying your product at very, very high prices for the foreseeable future. And so all you have to do is build the plants, and you've got a built-in customer base. And then your product is an invisible gas that you bury in the ground. So you don't have any logistics problems, you don't have any shipping problems, you don't have to worry about how it's going to arrive, you don't have to have a cold chain. It's like a pretty ideal export. And so I think for me, that's also sort of like one of the compelling sort of cases as an investor. Like, this is a pretty awesome business if people can get it off the ground. You know what I mean? Yeah. You've got a built-in customer base. It's very easy to ship.
Absolutely.
It's not a bad business.
So staying there though, and if people can get it off the ground, just to counterbalance, like Alex, what challenges do you see investing in the space? Not Octavia in particular, but generally, what challenges should investors be aware of, or risks to think through?
I think so the flip side of what I said is like when I think about this, I'm sort of betting on what human beings need versus what I know about human nature, and so I guess my bigger fear is how deep is the market for carbon capture. I think there's a lot of very wealthy sort of companies that have pledged, thank God, to be first buyers, and I think that's fantastic. You've got the Frontier Foundation and Stripe and all the big tech companies who are doing that. And I think and we've got rumblings of sort of a compliance market that's on its way and will continue to expand. And so I think if there's anything close to sort of a more or less real compliance market that has some sort of like staying power, then great, we're great. This is a great business, right, and it'll prosper. But if there isn't, and I think nobody's going to care less about climate change than they do today. Like, it's just going to become a more and more in-your-face issue, and more people are going to. So I think, on balance, I'm betting that the world will do what it needs to do, and create a compliance market and an actual market for these products. And then I think. But even if it doesn't come to fruition, if we can get down the cost curve enough to get to some real carbon to value wins, and we can actually start making jet fuel out of air captured carbon, and we can actually start making fertilizer and stuff like that, then I think that'll be a win as well. And I think companies like Octavia will be poised to sort of like meet the market where it is and start sort of like supplying their technology for other industries as well that start to spring up. So that's, I think, where I'm mostly bullish, is that, yeah, this is hard, and that's why it's, that's what investors are supposed to do, is like, sort of pick the hard to, yeah, the hard things to do, that if you do it right, there's a big win. And I think this is exactly that. Like, if you do it right, there's a big win. Yeah,
and I love that optimism as well, because in the climate space, there's a lot of doomsday, and when we actually think about the opportunity and the potential behind this kind of solution, it's really comforting, frankly. And I want to think it's going to be a big win.
And on that, I mean, just one, if you'll permit me, one other, just I happen to think that the way that it's phrased a lot in climate circles is like, it's progress versus climate. Mm-hmm. And that is not a possible framing for the world. The world needs progress. Like, people need to better their lives. They need to climb up the ladder of standard of living. And so that is a very, very privileged point of view, I think, from people who happen to have like gotten enough that they can sort of stay, okay, enough for me. And I think that's not the state of most of the world. And I think we are in a real opportunity here where you can actually have economic growth that is decoupled from emissions. You can have green growth. And I feel that is what we are starting to see here. And like, this is going to be sort of, I think, the model, I think, for development around the world, is that like, look, you don't have to sacrifice growth for your climate ambitions. In fact, they're joined together.
I couldn't agree more, especially in places like Kenya, where it's like the way to actually move ahead in a sustainable fashion and improve economic prosperity, well-being, livelihoods for all. Fiona, you were just about to jump in, and actually for you, there's a question in the Q&A.
Yeah.
Clarify around your arrangement to get the geothermal heat from Amanda. So if you don't mind addressing that as well as you speak, that'd be great.
Yeah. No, I think he was talking about carbon to value earlier, about using this carbon to make synthetic aviation fuels and curing cement, and that is really the end game. Yeah, right now we are removing carbon, but the end game is also, it's carbon to value. We don't to mine carbon anymore. We can use carbon in this cyclic kind of economy. So I just wanted to really iterate what Alex is saying, that's really the end game. And I think, I don't know if it was BCG or the McKinsey report, it was saying it's a whole $1 trillion economy if we get it right now. So yeah, I mean, I just wanted to iterate that. So when it comes to geothermal heat, yes, so the geothermal heat is very so it's called low-grade heat from the geothermal wells. So it's where we are in partnership with the private concession holders, and also to some extent the government, who are going to now sell to us the low-grade heat, which is very, very affordable. It will be very, very affordable instead of it being wasted out here. You remember, we also want to contribute to the growth of an economy. So yeah. I don't know if that answers your question, Amanda.
She probably can't answer you live, but if she can type it, I actually encourage everyone else in the room to type your questions in the Q&A if you have any, as we get to we have 20 more minutes and we'll open it up for questions. But in the meantime.
So Fiona, you are paying them for heat that would otherwise go to waste, basically. You're creating a revenue stream for them. That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's why they want to work with you. That's actually, it's a win-win.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So, all right, Fiona, what advice, like thinking about actually entrepreneurial journey, like getting this and doing it right with a young team, what advice would you give other entrepreneurs in Africa entering this space? We know that, there's definitely an invitation to build more of this across the continent. And what asks would you have for policymakers or investors to make the environment more conducive to building DACC?
Yeah, so I think for my advice to entrepreneurs is it's to build relationships and build traction. And when I'm talking about building relationships, this is at grassroots level. So, for example, we have this cottage industry here in Kenya. I don't know if those who are familiar with it, we call it the Juakali industry. It's also very close to industrial area. Building these relationships with these people. Remember, they've been in this industry, building the stoves, building different kind of products for the Kenyan market. And remember what you're doing. We have this catchphrase, building for Kenya, because I don't know if you know, like for example, when trucks are being assembled for Kenya or minivans, there's already a reinforced because there's a lot of carelessness with how people drive also and things like that. So, building that kind of relationship with them, you will be able to push out as much product as you can, which will be able to last for long. So I think those are one of the things I really appreciate about Kenya. It's the really versatile building industry we have here. So building that kind of relationship there. So it's not just with the industry in the grassroots level, it's building relationships with the government. And then talking about the government is very receptive of learning about these new technologies. And the thing with private sector, and then this is also going to tie into my ask for policymakers, but private sector to some extent usually drive the industry, and that's because they are able to pay for a lot of research and development. And to some extent, there's very little bureaucracy here. Their profitability is driven by the success of the product. So also just building relationships with the government, and in turn they'll be able to create more informed policy. And then when it comes to building traction, and I think this is something which is very true for us. We were only able to gain access to funding because we had something, can I call it a minimum viable product, and for people to see that it's actually working. We just need more funding to improve it. So building traction, building that kind of progress with the resources you have access to will allow you to unlock a lot of financing. And so my ask for what do I ask investors? I think here it's I think I also mentioned it, but like continue investing in DACC if you are, and invest in DACC if you're not. And that's because like for example, direct air capture or ClimateTech as a whole, you have hardware solutions and you have software solutions, and these solutions need to get out of the door as fast as possible. And the only way we can do that and also meet our climate goals is, if investors have some form of funding specified for patient capital, because like this is that very special type of investor who really understands our climate needs. When it comes to policy, I think just telling them to collaborate with the private sector, because they're really the ones driving the industry. They have the money, and they can really be able to push a lot because of the efficiency there. And collaborating the private sector will create a lot of knowledge sharing, and you have informed policy. So I think
Yeah, and
I also mentioned it in the previous one.
totally. And
then,
Fiona, you benefited a lot actually from a key connection, actually a champion within the Kenyan government that was really supportive of what you were building. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we really knock a lot of doors with the Ministry of Environment, the ministries who we think that we call it our stakeholder mapping, especially within the government sector. We really ensure that there's a lot of information sharing, telling them, oh, in this sector, this is what is happening. These are the policies happening in these countries. This is what can happen here in our country. This is how we can move forward. And, because you need to present a product which can also, because you see the thing with the government, they want to improve the economy. They want a product that will improve the economy, an industry, that will improve the economy, and something that is good for the people. So you need to be able to have, you need to be able to show them that aspect of your product.
Right.
And
goes back to the win-win point that we were making earlier, right? I mean, even that support from the government doesn't come from just the goodness of heart. Actually, it's really because it's in the interest of the government from an economic growth perspective and clean energy provision for Kenyans. So that's really interesting. So actually, Fiona, there's a few questions for you specifically. So I want to stay with you. One especially, it's relevant to what you were saying from Clara. What have been some of the key learnings in running the pilot plant so far? And what is your strategy to scale beyond this initial plant and beyond 2024?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting question. I mean, I'm not sure. I think it should be a 100-page book of the key learnings to get. And, that is what comes with, fast iteration and actually building these things at scale. We don't want to learn all of these things when we have projects having bad ready. We want to have these learnings when we have our unit skills. So one of the key learnings is, things such as how do we manage our water? So from the technical aspects, and I think, forgive me if I nerd out about this. So on the technology front is how do we manage the water? So remember in our DACC process, and maybe I'm happy to also give a product overview of how the machines work. Another session if it allows. So the water management system, how do you ensure you have very little use of water? How do you ensure you improve the life of the chemical filter? That is something, how are you able to, another learning was taking our energy down and, maintaining vacuums for longer. And I think those are very technical aspects, and I'm happy to share some of this more.
We can always have other sessions and deeper dives. But I think it's interesting that all of the learnings, as you were saying, Alex, earlier, it's about doing this as resource efficiently as possible from a resource use. And that's what the promise here. So for you, Alex, there's another question related as we get to the close, which is what do you think it will take to crowd in other investors? Like right now, Octavia is raising a round, but it still remains a fairly niche space. And especially those that are more familiar with like more typical, VC, type investments in fintech or e-commerce. What will it take to make them comfortable with this model?
I think a lot of things. I think there's a couple things that are sort of new. One is sort of related to if people are not familiar with the region. They might have a bunch of just preconceived, they know domestically the situation, they understand sort of the lay of the land. Going to another country where there's different regulations and they don't know where the best schools are and all that sort of stuff, I think it is maybe, I think that's a little scary. So I think it's a matter of like convincing people that there's a real opportunity here if they learn some of that stuff. And it's like an asymmetric opportunity. Like I think for a lot of investors, it's getting back to their roots as sort of like asymmetric opportunity investors. I read The Power Curve, which is sort of about the birth of Silicon Valley, and one of those early investors, I think it was John Doerr, who was saying like he sought out the things that were hard to solve, the things that people would say, well, you're not going to do that, and he was like, that's why I'm investing, because if they solve it, they're going to be the only ones, and they're going to be sitting on this super valuable thing. And so I think that's one thing, which is sort of like, I think once software sort of took off, that became a very simple pattern to match, sort of like here's because it can scale so quickly and it doesn't require that much investment up front. It can it's not a capital investment, absolutely. Engineers are expensive, et cetera, iterations expensive, but like compared to like building a gigantic plant with steel and concrete, it's a whole different thing. And so I think they don't look the same when you're building sort of technology that needs to be deployed at the project stage. There's more upfront costs, but then I think on the back end, there's a much more stable business model. If the thing you're building in your big steel and concrete factory is a thing that you can sell to the world, you don't have to convince users to change the behavior, and then you don't have to worry about them being fickle and going to the next thing. Basically, if you once you build the plant and there's a market for it, it's a good business. Mm-hmm. So I think the investment, it looks different. It doesn't look like you put a little bit of money in, you get some traction. You put a lot of money in, you scale it. Mm-hmm. You got to sort of put more money up front and then sort of wait until the projects get built.
Yeah, totally.
So I think. And then my final thing on that is that, like, I think we need venture investment. I think we need venture folks to sort of get closer to their roots of sort of like seeking out asymmetric opportunities where they can have big wins. And then I think we also need project finance, because mm-hmm. a lot of the stuff, you're not going to build a factory with just venture capital. You need debt. And so that's the other thing that, like, when you're ready to scale, you're going to need to go to banks and just get them to like loan you the money to build the factory. And that's like another whole thing. Yeah, so folks out there who know that, that's another big thing we need in the region. That's
definitely something that we at the Catalyst Fund, as we started investing in the space and climate tech, climate resilience and adaptation more broadly, had to learn. You cannot make a dent and invest in climate tech just by focusing on software. Like, you have to also focus on hardware. You have to learn to be comfortable with that. But as you're saying, once it's built, there's a market for it. We're solving a big problem. It will go places. It's just that the path to growth, like that curve, will look different. The capital mix will look different. And I think that's another thing that collectively in this ecosystem, we need to think about solving. How do we provide Octavia with the right affordable debt up front, maybe with a mix of patient capital, but then also commercial capital, because we're high-risk investors as VCs, right? We need to be there to also take them to the next level, but mix the right types of capital to make sure the companies get to the next stages and are successful and grow without, hitting hurdles and then dissolving. I think that's something that we all need to really think about. So I see, sorry, Fiona, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, just to really stress on that point, even with building relationships, it's not just the government and fellow private sector companies. You're also building relationships with the financial sector, and these are the DFIs. Do they have financial instruments for climate tech solutions? And climate tech solutions which take quite some time to really have a good return on investment. So yeah, I just wanted to stress that point.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Absolutely. So let me maybe get one more question that has come up from the audience, and then we'll close. From Arakiza, how can someone be engaged in such climate change opportunities as a fresh graduate? And I think that will be very inspiring hearing about the story of your team, Fiona.
I think mine is usually the funniest because mine was more Duncan. I know you know Duncan Karaoke, part of the founding team. He called me up one day. We had a very good relationship at a place where I had done attachments before. That is East Africa. So he called me one day and told me, Fiona, here's a challenge you have, please come and solve it. Being an engineer, you're told there's a challenge, you just grab at the opportunity and you're not sure how big this challenge is. So I went in the next day and I did my feet in the mud and I just got working on direct air capture. But how do you know about these opportunities? You need to be, I think, for me, you need to be in the right place at the right time. Opportunity does not come to you if you're not prepared for it. So make sure you have joined, we have a networking group here in Kenya. It's called Nairobi Climate Network. It's a very good network. You have policymakers there, you have engineers there, you have really investors there, you have a broad, it's a whole, all these different industries are coming together to work on, to just have very good solutions on climate. And this networking events is where you find people actually recruiting, people interested in working on innovative climate tech solutions. So I think just be very much present in such organizations. I'm happy to share some of these links with these people. It's just not NCN. I mean, how Martin, Duncan, and Martin met, it was through, I want to call it a networking forum. I don't know if you know about the DACC coalition. So, they were in this group, Martin and Duncan and Mike wanted to do a direct air capture project in their final year. And, Martin also, in a parallel, some form of universe, a former Dalbach consultant was doing a lot of research on direct air capture. And, they were in this forum together, and one of the managers of this forum found these people and connected them. And, that's how Octavia Carbon was born. I mean, purely out of networking, that's how we have, the first 15 people of this company. And I would really urge you to really just get out there, join this very vibrant climate action groups. They have employment opportunities there if you want to work on climate.
You can never know who you meet over a beer. Future co-founder, future angel investor.
Exactly.
That's great. All right. So final question for you all. You've been amazing. It's been a great conversation. And I want to leave the audience with one word from each of you that encapsulates your hope for the future when thinking about the impact of DACC. Which one word would you choose?
Let me go first, Alex. That's because I read this and I was like, you've already used the word that I have, and that's hopeful. When I think about DACC, I think about hope. We have hope to save our planet, and that's how I see it every day. I'm working on this solution, and there is hope. It's not all doom and doom. And the impact of DACC is just going to be very positive. And for me, it's just those two words. I know you said one word, but it's very hard to narrow down that. Yeah.
You're not the only one that cheats at this question. Okay, Alex, so yours?
I'm also going to cheat. I'm going to use a noun and an adjective. But I think for me I think green growth is the word that I would use. I think what we have here is an opportunity to sort of like entirely flip the paradigm of industry equals carbon, industry equals pollution. I think what we are on the cusp of building is a brand new industrial sector that literally runs on heat from the earth and wind and sun. And like that the world hasn't really seen it. It's sort of impossible for us to imagine. But I think that's what we're building here, and I think that's a beautiful vision. Whether or not we had a climate crisis or not, that's the world I would want to live in. And that's the world we're building. Yeah. Right.
And if we put them together, it's a hopeful green growth, or green growth for hope, which I love as a final let's see if you flip it around as a final to close this. So there's going to be two questions appearing on screen for the audience. Gabriel will launch a poll. And one is to ask you if you want to learn more about Octavia Carbon, what they're doing, and what they're building in this space. We will be happy to connect you with them. And the other is if you liked what you heard, if you want to hear more of these conversations and deep dives, we're planning probably at 8 or 10 series in this space on different verticals in climate tech. And so if you want more information or join the ClimateTech Venture Investing Collab and be part of these ClimateTech Unveiled conversations, let us know and we'll add you to the mailing list. It's obviously free, so it's not pure advertising I'm doing here, but let us know. We'll love to expand the community and really learn together. So let me know, Gabriel, when the poll is closed, because I can't see anything.
Yeah, we can give it a few more seconds and then close.
Okay, fantastic. But yeah, we'll have many more of these. And actually, for all of you investors in the room, if you want to bring one of your portfolio companies and actually speak, that's also an opportunity. Again, we're all at the cusp of something, but also early in the journey, both from a learning perspective and from a proof points perspective. So we're really all in this together. The more the merrier. So we want to give a platform to a lot of voices. But with that, I want to thank you, Fiona. Thank you, Alex, so much. I hope you two enjoy this as well, even though obviously very familiar with each other.
Yeah, it was good to see you again, Fiona.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we'll really excited to continue this journey with Octavia Carbon. Fiona, what you're doing is awesome. And I'm sure only good things are to come from here.
Yeah, thank you, and welcome again to our facility. I mean, if you get very good responses, very high responses, we can curate a tour for people to actually come here and actually interact with the tech and the team. Yeah.
Seeing the plan makes all the difference. Well, thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your Thursday, and we will be in touch very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.